Hey everybody, this is an invitation to participate in the 2022 AppState BioBlitz. We've been challenged by UNC Greensboro to figure out which university has the most species on campus. So this is going to happen the week of October 24th, and anyone can participate. You don't have to be a student or faculty member here at Appalachian State University. All you have to do is make observations of wild organisms on AppState properties during this time frame of October 24th through October 30th and post them on iNaturalist. So just a little introduction here to iNaturalist for those of you who are not familiar with this platform yet. This is essentially an online version of a nature journal that allows you to share what you're seeing with other people. The way this works is that you, for example, take a picture of an organism you're observing and upload it to the website where then other people can see it and, for example, suggest an identification for the organism that you've seen. So here's one of my observations as an example for what this looks like. We have a picture as evidence of the organism here, the suggested identification for the plant in this picture, the date and time when this was observed, and a location on a map. This is the minimum of information that we need to count for the BioBlitz. If you're using the app to take the pictures on your phone, then the when and where will automatically be supplied by the app on your phone. And to upload this data, of course, you have to create an account on iNaturalist. Now there's some extra info. If you scroll down on the observation, for example, you can enter some notes that go along with your observation. You also can add tags, for example, to make the observation easier to find with search terms. Depending on the organism, there are annotation options. So here I told it that the plant is flowering. And if you're participating in projects, they will automatically be included on this page as well. So for our BioBlitz, we have a project set up which will appear on these observations. And then we have interaction here with the community where several people have confirmed the ID that I had suggested for this organism, giving this now what is called a community taxon on iNaturalist. This plays a role then in quality assessment for these observations. If you scroll down further, you get this data quality assessment section. And if everything checks green on this section, then we have an observation that's considered research grade on iNaturalist. And if it has the correct copyright license, which allows other people to use this data, then it can be pulled into other databases. So this then makes these observations usable for the larger research community. So ultimately, this allows you to participate in all sorts of citizen science projects on iNaturalist. Now, how do you create these observations? iNaturalist actually has very nice help pages that guide you through the process. You can find these by searching for iNaturalist help online and checking out the Getting Started and video tutorials on this page. This will guide you step by step through creating observations on iNaturalist, either using the phone app or using the website. Now, one thing to pay attention to is that you're getting the correct app for what we're doing with the BioBlitz. iNaturalist actually has two apps that are available in the App Store. There's the iNaturalist app in two versions, both for Android and for the iPhone. And there is the Seek by iNaturalist app, which is basically a simplified version that does not require you to create an account, and therefore it does not automatically upload the data into the database. For the BioBlitz, we need to upload our observations. So you need the iNaturalist app here with the bird symbol for the app, or use the website to upload photos from your camera, for example. In contrast to that, the Seek app is more meant for children, for example, who are too young yet to have social media accounts. So with that app, you can, for example, use the phone camera to point at something, and it will tell you what it thinks, what kind of organism is showing on the screen. There's also some built-in challenges, you can earn badges, so it's more sort of like a game for children. However, it does not save a record of your observation into the database like the iNaturalist app does. So once you've downloaded the appropriate app onto your phone, you can again find step-by-step instructions how to use it to make observations. So they have both instructions for the iPhone as well as instructions for the Android app version for iNaturalist. If you don't want to use your phone to make observations, but prefer to use a camera instead, you can also upload photos through the web interface to iNaturalist. And once again, they provide you here with step-by-step instructions how to do that. Now, depending on what you want to do with iNaturalist, one version might work better than the other. The website, for example, offers additional options for adding tags, annotations, and other things to your observations. However, you might have to add the location information, for example, by putting a pin on a map. The phone apps, on the other hand, are able to automatically recognize where you are, where you're making your observations, based on the built-in GPS in your phone. So that allows you to upload observations a lot more quickly than if you were using the web interface. Okay, now that we know which app to use, where can we go to make observations for this BioBlitz? As mentioned before, in order to count, observations need to be done on AppState properties. So of course, main campus, including the nature preserve, will work for this. There are some off-campus areas in Boone that are also covered in this. The most promising one of those is probably the greenway areas around the athletic fields at State Farm Road. And then there's actually also a couple of areas outside of town that you can go to. Some notable ones include Pain Branch Park on 321, for example, or the ASU Farm and Dark Sky Observatory. So here's a map of where these are located, including pins placed on the map for previous iNaturalist observations in these areas. You can see the highest concentration of observations here on main campus, including the nature preserve, as well as the greenway area. So those are probably the main areas that we are targeting with this BioBlitz. But some of these other areas also look very promising. So we might be posting some updates on events going on in some of these other places. So now that we know where to go, what is it that we want to observe? The rule for this BioBlitz is that only wild organisms will count for this event. So that means anything free living in natural areas, including plants, animals, fungi, etc. But also, for example, weeds that grow in a garden, anything that you find in a park that wasn't specifically planted there, any wild critters that you find visiting indoors or garden spaces, for example, pollinators on plants. What will not count are observations of people or captive animals, including pets, for example, or cultivated plants like house plants or planted in a garden, and anything that's not an organism. Another thing to note is that you do not always have to have the organism in your observation. You can also record other evidence for the presence of that organism. For example, leaves that have fallen off the trees, or feathers and bones for animals, or droppings or tracks, for example, or any other sign of an organism having been there. You can also include sound files, for example, like bird calls. So next I have a few suggestions what to look for in our main observation areas, specifically during the month of October, based on previous iNaturalist observations. Things that people have seen at the nature preserve, for example, include salamanders, fungi and lichens, of course the trees and shrubs that make up the forest, some of the evergreens like ferns, mosses and liverworts, and even a few things still in bloom like witch hazel and gentians. Over at the Greenway around the State Farm complex, observations are dominated by birds, and so far 14 species have been seen here in October. So we can try if we can capture those observations again and maybe even add a few. Once again, the trees and shrubs, and even once the leaves are down, you can usually still identify them using winter tree ID keys, as well as quite a few invasive plants that have been reported in this area. For animals, we have quite a few observations of mammals in this area, for example deer, some late-season insects, and even some reptiles. And of course the fungi are also represented in this area by observations of polypores and earth balls. So now that you know what to look for, just get out there and make some observations. Of course, in the overall scheme of things, making observations and adding them to the database is just the first step in gathering the data on iNaturalist. The second step is adding identifications to the organisms in these observations. Now, when you first upload an observation, it starts out in the Needs ID category. And as the community adds additional identifications, these observations then might become research grade. The good news here is that for the BioBlitz, both the Needs ID and research grade categories will count for our project. So you do not depend on other people adding identifications to make your observations research grade before they can count. However, adding identifications, if you know what something is of course another big fun part of iNaturalist. And again, if you go to the iNaturalist help pages, they give you a step-by-step tutorial here how to identify observations. If you want to do this and narrow it down to just the observations for our AppState BioBlitz project, you can set up the filters on the Identify page to only include the observations from the project. So in order to do that on the website, you click on Identify in the top menu, and then click on Filters to narrow down what you want to identify. If you open up the More Filters drop-down, you can enter the project name AppState BioBlitz 2022 and then update the search. This will give you only the observations from our project that still need to be identified. Now you can also try to identify things on the phone apps, but it's always easier to see the details in an observation on a computer screen. So just some best practice suggestions here for using iNaturalist. For adding observations, I would suggest to use the phone apps, just because it's faster to do it that way since they already upload the location data with the observation. If you want to add additional annotations like tags or observation fields, that's best done using the website. Identifying, as I just mentioned, is best done using a monitor where you can see the pictures in more detail. And the website also has a lot more functions for messaging and interactions with the community on iNaturalist that you might be missing out on if you're just using the phone app. Last but not least here, a couple of do's and don'ts for using iNaturalist for our BioBlitz. Remember that only wild organisms will count into our project stats. And try your best to take pictures that will facilitate identifications of the organisms that you're photographing. This includes, for example, combining multiple pictures from different angles or zoomed in to enlarge the organism. If you have pictures that show more than one species in one photograph, you can actually duplicate observations to account for all of the species shown in that picture. And it always helps if you can suggest an initial identification for the organism that you have observed, even if it's just something generic like plant or animal. On the side of the don'ts here, of course, use common sense as you're making observations. Stay on AppState properties with this. If you're including people in your observations, you should probably ask permission before posting the picture on the web. As far as making it possible for others to identify the organism in your picture, make sure that you have good photos. In order to avoid annoying the people who identify organisms on iNaturalist, the 3 most important things to keep in mind is to not upload any pictures that are just too poor in quality, not to combine pictures of different species in one observation, and avoid splitting photographs of the same organism into several observations. Now, these things take a little bit of a learning curve in how to use iNaturalist properly, and we'll be posting a little bit more help on this during the week of the BioBlitz. Another thing to keep in mind is that these observations eventually become raw data for research projects, so avoid confirming identifications without actually knowing how to identify the species. With all that in mind now, let's get out and make some observations. And hopefully we can show UNC Greensboro that even in late October, AppState still has the greater biodiversity on campus.